Okay, everyone, welcome back to episode 7. I know it's been a little while since I've been here. But today we're going to talk a little bit about setting up your first compliance policy and figuring out how to set it up, and hopefully it'll be pretty quick and it'll give you an idea of where you can start. And then the follow-on episode, I guess it would be 8, we'll talk about implementing a report-only conditional access policy to see, how that's impacting your resource access. So, first things first. Before we get started, the policy we're going to implement today is going to be Windows versioning. It's a pretty easy one to implement, and there's a couple different options. So we're going to walk through those pieces real quickly, and that way it'll give you a little bit of an idea of how it works. And then I'm going to show you some different options and show you how to safely do this in your environment. So the first thing that we're going to do here is we're going to create a compliance policy. But in order to do that, we should see which versions of Windows are running in our environment first, right? So if I come over here to the Windows tab, I'm using the new Preview Devices experience, which gives me some options and filters here. You'll see that I have the OS version tab. Now, in my environment, I have a bunch of different scenarios. So you'll see that I have devices that are managed by Configuration Manager. They're tenant attached. I have co-managed devices, Intune, MDE devices, and then I probably have even more devices. So the devices I'm going to impact today are going to be my Intune devices and my co-managed devices. Now these are devices that are either managed directly by Intune or they're managed in conjunction with Configuration Manager. So I'm just going to add a quick filter here, and I'm going to remove everything except for the Intune and the co-managed devices. Now since we're working with Windows, this is fine. If you're going to work with Mac OS or you had some partner scenarios with compliance, you may choose to add some additional managed by columns here to get the right picture, but that's probably something for another episode. So I'm going to select Intune and co-managed, and this is going to show me all the devices that are Intune managed in my tenant and that are specifically managed by co-managed with Intune or managed directly by Intune. So if you look here, what you'll see that all these devices have a compliance state. There's none that say not evaluated, NA, or anything like that. And then you'll see that I have the OS version column here. Now this is where we want to pay attention. So in my environment here, it looks like I have essentially 2 OS versions, 19045, which is a version of Windows 10, and 22621, which is a version of Windows 11. So when I create my compliance policy, what I need to make sure that I do is that I deploy this policy and include those 2 OS versions. Otherwise, what's going to happen is those devices are not going to be compliant, and that's going to cause a whole thing, right? So the other thing I want you to pay attention to here is on the right-hand side of the column, we have what we call the revision number of the OS. So what that is that's the patch level of the OS, and the compliance policy can actually use that value as well. If you're ever wondering about how to get the the revision history, you can quickly just go to the Windows 10 or Windows 11 update history, and this is given on every update so that you know what it is. I'm going to copy one of these out here just real quickly so that way we can use it in our compliance policy. I'm going to take the minimum version across my environment, right? And I'm going to copy that out so that way I can use it here. So I'm going to go to compliance policies again on Windows 10, and I'm going to go ahead and create a policy. So I'm going to go to Windows 10 and later, and then I'm going to create a policy. This one's going to be called something very clever like compliance demo. All right, good policy names always required. And then I have all the different properties that I can specify as part of my compliance policy. Now, Windows OS version is underneath the operating system version. So you'll see here I have minimum OS version, which specifies the minimum OS that's required in order to become compliant. I have maximum OS version here as well, so I could specify like the maximum OS that I require to become compliant. This may be useful if you're deploying these to groups of, let's just say, warehouse machines or something that you don't want unauthorized versions of the OS on. I could specify a maximum version of the OS to make sure they stay on Windows 10 to be compliant and don't go to Windows 11, for instance, or maybe they don't go on a unvalidated patch version, right? Things like that. So for my example, I have my minimum patch version. I'm going to go ahead and punch that in here. And that will basically say, hey, in order to be compliant in this environment, you have to have at least this minimum patch version available. So this is this is the Windows major and minor build versions, which for Windows 10 and 11 is the same, 10.0. And then to the right here, we have the OS build number, which this is Windows 10. I believe it's 22.2. And then we have the patch level, right? And remember, back to my prior page, this was the minimum running in my environment. When you create this policy, you may choose to go a little bit lower than this, right? Because you need to think about, hey, when devices get built, they're not going to be at the patch level, this current patch level immediately. So I'm going to potentially need to back this up. For the sake of this demo, I'm just going to set it to 0, which would mean any version of Windows 10 22.2, right? But you can adjust that, play with that as your environment allows. The last thing I'm going to call out here is down below we have this option called valid operating system builds. You may choose to use this setting as well. What this allows you to do is say, hey, I want to have multiple builds like an array. So I'll say Windows 10, and then I can say 10.0.19045.0, and then no maximum version. I can also, I have to specify a maximum version. So for this one, I can just say, let me just copy this. I can just say 9999, something like that, right? And then I could also have a version for Windows 11, right? And I could say that this needs to be 10.0.22621.0. And then I could copy this again. And what this allows me to do is this allows me to say, the way that this policy is written is I allow Windows 10 22.2 in my environment, and I allow Windows 11 22.2. If the device was on Windows 11 21.2, so the original version of Windows 11, then that version would be non-compliant. So this allows you to do that sort of thing. Okay, so from there, what I want to do here is I want to go ahead and hit next, and then I have my actions. So what these actions do is these actions allow you to specify, hey, do I want to mark the device immediately non-compliant after 0 days, or do I want to take another action like sending an email to a user, adding it to the retire list, whatever. What I'd recommend when you use these settings is, again, you got to think about devices that come into your environment, and when they're coming into your environment, they're not going to be patched currently, right? So I usually recommend setting at least starting with a sort of grace period, maybe 7 days. And then that way a device will get marked into grace period as soon as it comes online. And if it doesn't patch within, let's just say 7 days or whatever that number is for your organization, then it goes non-compliant, right? So this allows you to basically have a little bit of leeway with your compliance policy, knowing that devices are going to come online and maybe need to be remediated without just immediately locking them out. I have scope tags here, and then I can assign it to a group. I would avoid assigning compliance policies to all devices, all users, at least to start, until you feel comfortable with them. So I would assign this to a small pilot group, some devices, so you can see how it works. And then I met with my review and create screen, right? And on here you'll see that I have minimum OS version configured, in valid operating system builds. I wouldn't probably configure these both in the same policy. This is just how I did the demo. So. But that sort of gives you an idea what to do. That's it for this episode. In the next episode, what we're going to cover is setting a conditional access policy in report only mode, and then we'll start to see this compliance policy in action to see how it might impact different resource access. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys all next time. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.